Good morning, everybody. I am the Cynic. I have a question. What the flying fuck is equality? And no, I'm not talking about the happy, feel-good feelings the word equality gives due to its association against racism, sexism, and discrimination. I'm looking for a concrete definition that will leave no doubt onto what the word actually means. Where am I coming from with this, you might ask? Well, from all of the conversations and videos I've seen from feminists and social justice types who tout this word about ad nauseum, I have yet to really understand what it means in the senses that they use it. I'm sure we all know the dictionary definition of feminism, and it's the advocacy of political, social, and economic equality for women. Fine, alright. But what does equality mean in these contexts? And the reason I ask this is because the debate against feminism always comes back to the same place. How feminism isn't about equality in some way, shape, or form, but giving women special privileges. Yet if you look at it in the context that these special privileges are given, it is for the sake of equality. That women need these special privileges to reach this kind of equality that they want. So first off, let's take a look at the definition of equal, taken from the Google Offered Dictionary. I'd use the word equality, but the definition relies upon the root word equal, and I'm wasting enough time rambling about it here. Equal, a person or thing considered to be the same as another in status or quality. Pretty straightforward. And yet, not really when you take into consideration the nuances and just how ambiguous not only the word same is, but what constitutes both status and quality. Especially when you get down to the nitty-gritty details and consider that each individual person, be they man or woman, does almost everything in a different way and is perceived in different ways by others. For feminism's advocates, what constitutes economic equality varies so heavily it's nigh impossible to pin down in any meaningful way. Most people in Western societies like to think equal opportunity means economic equality as far as this is concerned, but this raises the question of what constitutes economic opportunity. Many feminists will point to the unequal outcomes and use these findings as evidence to their claim that there is not equal opportunity, stating things like male culture and male in-group preference halts the endeavors before they may manifest. And to be fair, they are a little correct on this matter. Take, for example, the article about how Star Trek jokes make women feel unwelcomed in computer science courses. In the article, linked below, a woman recounts her time back in high school when she joined a computer science course and felt marginalized because the professor and students therein, mainly male obviously, connected via pop culture jokes about things that geek culture boys would identify with, such as Star Trek and Dungeons and Dragons. The article goes on saying, quote, "Work from our lab shows that when high school girls see Star Trek posters and video games in computer science classrooms, they are less interested than boys in taking the course. When the classroom is devoid of decor, girls still opt out. It is only when an alternate image of computer science is presented by replacing geeky objects with art and nature posters that girls become as interested as boys. Basically, geek stuff is too boyish for girls, and in order to get more girls into computer science courses, they need to conform to a more feminized class workspace in order to get them to feel comfortable and welcome." Now, if we're going to take equality to be the universal good, and that she's correct in her assertion that such a change would, in fact, make females more likely to enter computer classes, then it would be prudent that such a change take place. Though, again, this relies on the idea that equality is an objective good. Digressing back to the feminist definition of equality, though, political equality is another nebulous goal of theirs. Some want women to meaningfully vote. Others want female political representation in all oligarchic, or, representative government structures, declaring that the lack of parity representation is, in fact, an inequality against women in its own right. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But by far, the most ambiguous and undiscernible idea they have is the notion of social equality. Now, the first two I can understand somewhat and figure out the ultimate ends, but this one, I can't fathom in the least, despite all the time I've spent thinking on it. Well, after you get past the more shallow aspects, like, cat calling it wolf whistling, anyway. So, this all stems from the one idea I take issue with, not only from feminists, but the alleged egalitarians whom tout the ideas of female equality as well. The implication that equality is an inherent good with how undiscernible and subjective it is. Now, before the comments start, let me clarify by saying the word equality is taken as a good for good reason. It was the principal idea behind ending slavery in the Western world, and to stop socially acceptable aggressions like hangings and draggings for things like racism. Not stop them outright, since true hate crimes, like all crimes, will never be stopped fully because of humanity's drive for tribal identity and willingness to commit immoral acts for selfish reasons. But it did make it so that it became socially unacceptable. However, equality's vagueness and subjective nature are what make me question its overall utility for anything outside of the sphere of government or aggressive influence. Take, for example, the idea of slavery in post-industrial America, and the movement to force modern-day Americans to pay reparations to the descendants of African slaves. To some, this is considered equal because it's ultimately rebalancing the scales of history that the white devil has placed upon the backs of black people. Though others say it's unequal in that modern-day white people have never had or owned slaves. Therefore, it isn't our responsibility to give any reparations to what our ancestors did in the past. That such a wealth redistribution would, in fact, not be equal, but special privilege. Arguments can be made for both sides, and the word equality and all of its variations can be used in contradictory ways on both fronts. So, with two juxtaposed positions of view colliding, which side holds the correct notion and usage of the word equality? Are those demanding reparations right in their drive for historical restitution, or those claiming today's America isn't guilty of the crimes of slavery and shouldn't be punished as such? Are both right, or are neither? Another example would be women in politics. Those who believe in the female vote versus more female politicians. If the female voters would rather choose a male candidate, wouldn't forcing them to choose a female candidate disenfranchise the female voter, thus perpetuating inequality? And if allowed their male candidate, doesn't that contribute to the lack of female representation and the equality therein? Again, the ideals of equality can be used in contradictory ways. Another example of equality is in an article I'd read a while ago about how parents reading bedtime stories to children is giving them an unfair advantage over children whom do not have loving families. And no, I'm not making this up. Links below. In the article, there's a psychologist who believes that while there are children whom do not get the nurturing and time with loving parents, kids whom do receive this kind of attention and affection are advantaged, and through that advantage, disadvantaging children whom do not get the same kind of care and attention. Now, to be fair, he didn't advocate that parents stop reading and being loving to their children for the sake of equality, but he does suggest that such a thing is, in fact, unequal. And he's absolutely right. It is unequal. Studies do show that children who have more attentive parents do better in life. So, the question becomes, do we want to make this inequality rectified? Well, there are two ways of rectifying this inequality. Either every parent has to love and give time to their children, or no parent can. These two courses of action will bring about equality in terms of the problem of advantaging parental love. Of course, neither of these will happen, and as such, the inequality described here, much like most all inequalities that isn't directly enforced, is inescapable. Unless the state takes children away, of course, then no child will get parental love. This is equal, but is it good? I'd say no, but advocates of equality might be of a different mind. And herein lies the crux of the issue. How far can equality go before it becomes a bad thing? How much equality is too much equality? And this question isn't rhetorical. I'm not just speaking to the feminists out there. I'm speaking to the egalitarians and the MRAs and the rationalists who believe in the equality of the sexes or equality in general. I want to know how much equality is enough to fulfill your satisfaction. I have made videos stating that I have supported equality. I will admit that now. But then I considered the scenario about political equality of female voters versus the female politicians. Which one was the correct form of equality? And from there, I started wondering what equality really was, and have since reconsidered my stance on it. Equality faces two issues. One is its definition, and the other is human nature, including preferences, individuality, and differences therein. Everybody wants an advantage, whether it be born into a richer country, having affectionate parents, being mechanically inclined, genetics that are more disposed to lower levels of fat, or genes that promote higher levels of intelligence. We all want traits and characteristics that differentiate us and give us ability to get ahead in life. We are living, breathing, biological beings predisposed to sexual reproduction and strives for comfort and standard. Want any advantage we can get in order to fulfill our own personal interests. In order to reach equality in its purest form, differences like the ones I've mentioned would need to be eradicated in their entirety for the sole reason that difference creates advantage. Organisms which hold more desirable traits will always win out over organisms with less desirable traits in the mating game, and so too does this apply with society and reaching better standards of living. The differences in culture of like-minded individuals coming together isn't conducive to inclusivity to all whom refuse to acclimate to the culture created. Women whom wish to enter into computing courses but refuse to or are incapable of enjoying the Star Trek jokes and proceed to change it will ultimately lead to the degeneration of the computer science industry, as the culture that created and maintained it is eroded away by a collective that places the feelings of women over the enjoyment of the workspace. Because it's not just limited to the decor of the walls, but the language and interaction of the students, it would only stand to reason that the male students, if they wish to maintain their enjoyment of course, would work away from the female in order to get some semblance of the geek culture that they connected with and found appealing in the first place. This also is unequal and would need to be rectified for the sake of parity. Though, how does one force a group of people whom connect and appeal to one another to accept one whom doesn't share that connection without directly influencing the psyche and mind of those they seek to control? And yes, it is control. It isn't just making them obey, it's making them want to obey. It isn't just about making them accept inclusivity. It has to be about making them want to accept inclusivity. Think this is hyperbolic? Hardly. As demonstrated by the story titled Jeremy Corbyn Slams Sexist After-Work Drinking Culture for Being Unfair to Mothers, wherein the author complains about how women are excluded from after-work drinks between men as the culture, quote, benefits men whom don't feel the need to be at home looking after their children and is discriminates against women who will want to obviously look after the children that they've got. Unquote. Which leads to the men who do go out for drinks to make business decisions outside of the boardroom where the mothers aren't present and able to throw in their own input due to their responsibilities and obligations, keeping them from interacting with the drinking culture. In this context, differences that hinder one party from participation or enjoyment, regardless of the party's own decisions or their own priorities, are a form of discrimination. Thus, to achieve equality within this would require universal agreement and a hindrance on freedom and life preference. In order to achieve equality, the same concept would need to be applied for female voters choosing non-female politicians, for the same divide between those whom think that reparations would need to be paid for slavery versus those whom think it should not. To achieve any realistic and consistent form of equality, as presented by the growing examples of perceived discriminations within the Western world, opinions of what constitute equality would need to become uniform, and differences would need to be eradicated. And a species that bases its associations, both social and economic, on preference and benefit, such a purist notion would be difficult to do without involving itself within the human being's direct psyche and mind. Equality, taken to its ultimate conclusion, would require a level of thought policing that would make Big Brother's Ministry of Love cream its proverbial pants with how double plus good it is. There could be no preference. There could be no analyzing skill and individual priority. There could be no individual priority. There could be no difference or advantage. There could only be equality. Now I know what you're thinking. Cynic, this is all way too contrived and you're reading way too much into it. Again, I direct you to the accusations of discrimination and equality I've listed. Women not being in the same classes with the same amount of men in these classes is, in fact, an inequality. Decisions being made between board members off the clock while female peers are not present at a bar due to prior childcare obligations is, in fact, an inequality. Perhaps this takes a purist, strict, and overly intrusive and controlling form of it, but still, exclusion is considered unequal within these contexts. And that's the great thing about equality for those whom wish to control others. The fact that the definition of equality is so fluid and molded by personal and subjective opinion, the idea could be used to push any and every agenda with only the slightest bit of thought to determine the advantaging differences. Though I cannot diss equality outright, as it has done some good in history. So I'll just chalk this up to a spectrum between not enough and too much equality. Hence my question about how much is enough. As such, equality is to be held in varying degrees and beliefs that are subject to each individual's preferences and ideals. In this, I ask again, dear viewer, what is your definition of satisfying equality within society? I'd say my stance puts my beliefs in equality to men and women being equal under the law. But then again, what does that even mean? Judges and juries decide what ultimately happens to men and women who commit crimes. The same crimes even, because they take it by a case-by-case basis and use the law and the created precedents only as guidelines. To demand equality under the law would be to demand an end to public jury trials, and demand that context and the multitude of variables that led up to the crime were not taken into consideration. That, or thought police the judge and jury into an absolute equality that would put Big Brother directly into their minds. So, do I believe in equality? No. No, I don't. Mainly because the definition is too fluid for me to accurately identify and side with. Do I have my own idea on what constitutes equality among men and women, or whites and blacks? Yes. The redundant notion that we are all equally human and all equally entitled to non-aggression by others. Past that, however, I leave it to the individual. Associations, employment practices, sexual attractions, and even sexual and gender identity are things that are none of my business to dictate. Oh, I'll judge, as well as most do, just won't say it out loud. But to enforce arbitrary notions of parity and equity isn't any business of mine, so long as physical aggression isn't being committed. I am the Cynic, everybody. Have a nice day.